think like Epstein's names and Maxwell's names, and then one text that said co-conspirator. And he, I guess, had seen this unredacted, and he posted and he said, I've seen this. There are people written here as co-conspirators. Why is this all redacted? And actually Todd Blanche, Deputy Attorney General, responded and said, oh, well, there's victims on this sheet, and the co-conspirator who's listed here is mentioned elsewhere in the files, so we're not really hiding anything. I mean, they're really trying their best to completely muddy the waters. Now, apparently, they're going back and they are starting to unredact some of these names.
Because they've been revealed.
Right. But I don't know. What do you think? I kind of feel like we're currently witnessing maybe one of the biggest sex crime cover-ups of all time.
Maybe the biggest sex crime cover-up, and the Trump administration is up to their neck in the cover-up. That's an absurd explanation. There are some victims. Well, redact the victims.
Right.
Yeah, but don't redact
the co-conspirators.
Perpetrators.
Yeah.
Plus, the fact that they may have appeared somewhere else doesn't mean there isn't useful information on them in what you've redacted. That's a ridiculous argument. I mean, it doesn't even pass the most elementary smell test, does it?
No, that's why I said I think we might be witnessing the biggest cover-up of sex crimes ever.
And that's just horrific. And the other thing I want to say is people like Lutnick and others who are caught up in the files, Peter Attia, who just got hired as a contributor to CBS and had some of the worst, most disgusting, most misogynist messages. Their explanations are just absurd. Their attempt to spin this is beyond belief. They're twisting themselves into pretzels. And by the way, they only admit this when, Sam?
After they get caught.
When they get caught. They're not remorseful about what they did, or they would have come clean years ago. They're only remorseful about getting caught, and then they just twist themselves into these ridiculous explanations to try to justify what they've done. And then, oh, I'm so sorry, what a mistake. Yeah, right. The mistake was you got caught. And until you got caught, you said nothing, or you lied like Lutnick and others.
I'm starting to get more and more suspicious, too, about the death of Jeffrey Epstein. Which hasn't really been covered much by the mainstream media. There was, in the files, somebody discovered that the DOJ reported Epstein's death the day before it happened. They'd written a press release, and the press release reported his death, and it was dated the day before he died.
Is that verified that they actually did that?
I mean, the document is in the files. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's been no explanation that I've seen of why. I mean, was it a typo? I mean, look, I've worked in media relations. Sometimes you copy paste, samples, and
right.
You forget to change the date, or you forget to change the name here or there. But I don't know. Again, it's just like when you start at all these explanations on their own, right? There's this chunk of video missing. The guards weren't there. His roommate was shuttled out the day before. Yeah, I guess all those, this press release, I guess all those on their own are explainable. But when they start stacking on top of each other, it's like,
it's pretty bad. And add to that Epstein did not appear to be suicidal at any point.
Yeah, there was something else recently that said in one of his emails, he was reaching out to some doctor or some scientist about some sort of DNA thing. Yeah, about extending his life. I mean, it doesn't sound like someone who would commit suicide to me.
It really did not. And it's just like all this Trump stuff. Maybe they could try to explain one or two things, but 20 things and probably a lot more is yet to come. They just can't spin it as hard as they try. And they're the masters of spin. I'm surprised they didn't blame it all on Clinton or Biden.
There's like a conspiracy floating around the internet that not only that Epstein is still alive.
Yes, I've heard that one.
You heard that one? Yeah, not that he hung himself or someone killed him, that he's still out there somewhere alive.
Well, for decades there was this conspiracy theory that Hitler's still alive, in Argentina or something. No matter what happens, you're going to have the crazies coming out with conspiracy theories. Unfortunately, in the age of Trump, these conspiracy theories have had a lot more currency than they ever had before.
But I'm saying this Epstein stuff, which was once considered conspiracy, I don't know.
I don't know. There's so much there. I don't know if we'll ever know what actually happened. But as you say, when you put it all together, it's pretty suspicious. Yeah. And there are a lot of people who would very much want to get rid of this guy.
For sure. Our final piece of Epstein news this evening. Documents detail Jeffrey Epstein's efforts to foster strategic, sometimes reciprocal relationships with Russian officials. Jeffrey Epstein maintained close relationships with Kremlin insiders, according to documents released by the DOJ. Between 2011 and 2019, he served as a facilitator for Russian elites, arranging not only sexual orgies, but also real estate deals and offshore financial schemes. However, his repeated requests to meet with Vladimir Putin appeared to go unanswered.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of this yet. We've got to learn more, but clearly he had a relationship with Russian elites and apparently with some associated with the Russian intelligence services. What his motive and goals were are not clear to me. But again, there's just so much here that is so suspicious. And if true, is so horrific. I mean, if this guy, is cozying up to the Russians and serving Russian interests, that's something that's been Donald Trump has been accused of for a very long time with, some credibility to those accusations.
Moving away from Epstein, God, there was just so much Epstein stuff today, just this week already.
And there's going to be more.
Probably. But
look, they just touched the redactions.
Moving off the Epstein stuff, at least for this episode, at least for this section of the episode, 1 year after the Trump administration took control of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the consumer watchdog has largely retreated from enforcement and regulatory work, changes that consumer advocates and Democrats now estimate have cost Americans at least $19 billion in financial relief.
Here's the thing.
Oh.
You know who's gotten in charge of this? According to the media, Russell Voigt. You know who he is? One of the architects of Project 2025, which goes after, these consumer protection regulatory agencies, who was caught on tape saying, yes, I am a white nationalist, who was one of the most extreme members of the administration. And according to press reports, this agency which saves ordinary people. You're not talking about, money going to the so-called elite. You're talking about ordinary people, who deal with banks and credit card companies. Every one of us does that. And this is our protection. And apparently they've dismissed very strong suits that were undergoing and have pretty much shut down the enforcement mechanism. And, while the administration is giving these huge tax breaks and benefits to the rich, I just heard that Amazon is getting an enormous tax break from the bill, the big ugly bill. They're cracking down on those in government who are trying to protect ordinary Americans, just as they're shutting down of any efforts to regulate pollution in the environment, to control climate change. Who's going to be hurt by that? Not the millionaires and the billionaires who can protect themselves, but once again, the ordinary people that Trump claims to represent.
Good point, Dad. The Washington Post layoffs are actually a bigger bloodbath than we originally thought. News reports about the layoffs originally reported that about 1/3 of the Post newsroom would be eliminated by the layoffs. However, an accounting by the Washington-Baltimore Newspaper Guild, the union that represents Post journalists, finds that the Post eliminated close to half of the journalists it used to employ. Half. Jeez.
When I was a kid, I devoured science fiction. And one of the themes of some of the books I read was that corporations were getting so big and so powerful that ultimately one big corporation would control everything. And, I thought, come on, that's just crazy science fiction. We're not there. but we're getting close.
We're like, there's like 7 that control
Yeah,
most
exactly. A
everything.
very small number of corporations have this enormous influence over our lives. Now it's controlling the news we get, the politics through big donations, what's going on in our colleges and universities. It's truly frightening. Jeff Bezos, like Donald Trump, does not represent you. He represents himself and his quest for riches. And the last thing these corporate heads and billionaires want is a vigorous, investigating, independent journalism. That's anathema to them. Now you may say, oh, he's so rich, doesn't matter. As we pointed out, for these folks, you're never too rich. You always want more. And this is just the last element of how Bezos is destroying the Post. Killing the endorsement of Kamala Harris at the 11th hour, right before the election, intervening in, journalistic decisions, revamping the editorial page to be much more pro-capitalist, pro-Trump, and now gutting half of the hardworking journalists in the Post, including essentially coming very close to entirely shutting down the Post's coverage of what's going on around the world. It's truly frightening how much control corporate America now has over things that matter to you and me.
Good point. All right, with that, we will move on to our question portion of the show. Before we do that, we have 1,200 people watching, but only 400 likes. Make sure you like this stream. It helps us a lot. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. Turn on the notification bell so you know we're live. Remember that donations and members get in the queue to get their questions answered. Thank you to Marzim for your $20 donation. I just saw that.
Yeah, we're getting some nice donations. Thank you. That really helps us a lot.
Our first question is from member.
Can I have my soda before we get to that?
Absolutely, sir. You don't have plastic stuck to your soda tonight, which is a good thing.
That's a progress.
Progress. That's all we can ask for in life, right?
That's right.
All right. Our first question is from Patrick Murray.
Oh, a good buddy.
They say, do you see any similarities between the Epstein files and the anti-Mason party in America? The Freemasons killed William Morgan in 1827 for threatening to leak their secrets. The Epstein estate has been harassing victims and those who speak out, as well as possibly being related to Epstein's death. Your thoughts?
That's quite brilliant. I haven't seen anyone in journalism. I mean, it hasn't been done because I don't see everything. But the anti-Mason movement was a very powerful movement in the early 19th century. And indeed, there was this famous alleged murder and other alleged abuses on the part of this secret society. On the other hand, some of America's foremost statesperson, including George Washington, was a Mason, and there's a lot of Mason symbolism here in the nation's capital. But a lot of people believed at the time that Masons were an evil, secret conspiracy. There was nothing quite like the Epstein files that exposed them. But the first powerful third-party movement, believe it or not, in the United States was the anti-Masonic Party. The opposition to the Masons led to the formation of an entire political party that did pretty well, although it faded out pretty quickly. And it was, this is not well known, the anti-Masons who held the first national presidential nominating convention, and then the other parties at the time, the Democrats and the Whigs, followed suit.
Right. Thank you to Michelle Martinez for your donation. Who else
but someone in our audience would ask about the anti-Masons?
Definitely. Peaceful Resistor donated $20. They said the Post was the last straw. I finally canceled Amazon. I'm also in the process of trying to reduce my dependence on products from the tech oligarch class. So shout out to you. This is a question from In Your Face New Yorker. They say, do you think it's possible that anyone who went to Epstein's Island honestly didn't know what was going on?
Look, anything is possible. I think, however, it is highly unlikely. Maybe almost impossible. Sherlock Holmes once said, once you eliminate the impossible, what's left is the probable. I think it's probable that, lots of these people knew. It didn't seem to be a big secret. Trump talked about it several times, right out in public. There are all these incriminating photographs and emails, which I think are only the tip of the surface. We don't know what's in those 2.5 to 3 million other emails. So yes, I think it is entirely possible that many, many more people than we thought knew not exactly, but had a pretty good idea of the nefarious things that Epstein was doing. I think you'd have to be pretty much deaf, dumb, and blind not to.
Do you believe that the Epstein files could have any chance of getting Trump impeached? I recall from your book, A Case for Impeachment, that crimes committed prior to being president could be used against him.
Absolutely. There is no limit constitutionally on what constitutes an impeachable offense. In fact, Gerald Ford, who was then minority leader of the Congress way back when, said, when asked, what's an impeachable offense? He said, whatever the U.S. House of Representatives decides it is at any given moment. And remember, there is no judicial check on impeachment. It is solely rested in the majority vote of the House, and then conviction is solely vested in the Senate. As long as Republicans control the Congress, there's zero chance. And I'm not sure the Democrats are going to impeach him either, unless they somehow feel, and at the moment there's no chance, that there's some chance of getting enough votes in the Senate to convict him. 2/3.
Right. You need a second?
No,
Okay.
Keep going.
This is
Just looking something up.
This is from member Obi Family. They say, Professor, applying your, quote, follow the money principle, in what ways can Trump gain from letting the U.S.-Russia nuclear treaty lapse? Should we prepare for the release of a Trump Gold-class Strongman Series warhead available to the highest bidder anytime soon?
I put nothing past
That's
him.
a crazy thought.
Yeah, he's already talking about, reopening nuclear testing and building up our nuclear weapons just so he's the toughest kid on the block, just so he can burnish his ego. The truth is, we have enough and Russia has enough that if there was an all-out nuclear war, the only issue would be how high will the rubble bounce. That's not my quote. That's quotes of, scientists who study this. But here's what I was looking up. Remember I said Amazon's going to get a big boost?
Yeah.
Based on early 2020, this is an AI, 2026 reports, Amazon significantly reduced its U.S. corporate tax liability by roughly 7 to 8 billion following changes in the tax law. The company's reported tax bill dropped from $9 billion to $1.2 billion.
Wow.
That's incredible. A corporation, $100 billion plus corporation paying a pittance for what they are worth in taxes. Yes, other reports, including the Wall Street Journal, confirm that. From $9 billion to $1.2 billion.
Wow.
Meanwhile,
according
to the Wall Street Journal, Amazon's pre-tax U.S. profits increased by $45.5 billion to $89.5.
So it doubled.
So, they're paying the kind of taxes that, on a percentage basis, that firemen and school teachers might be paying.
Jeez. This is a PS from Obi Family. They said, my family bought me conservative at the core for Christmas, absolutely loving it.
Thank you. I really think, if you want to understand what's going on today, the 100 years of history that I go through there, in a pretty clear way, I think, explains exactly what's happening right now. I have a whole section, by the way, in which I talk about the history of conservative racism and how Trump is the culmination of that. That was, of course, before he had the black Republican Senator Tim Scott said was the most racist thing we've ever seen coming out of this White House, implying, of course, other racist things. It was all before that, in which I outlined how Trump is the inheritor of a tradition of racism.
This is a $5 donation from the Mad Hatter Forever 23. They say,
they're a good friend.
Yes. Any thoughts on the controversy over Hollywood and music industry stars using their platform for political activism during these polarizing times?
You're the media expert, the entertainment expert. I'll let you take that one.
I think that this is America. You should be able to say what you want, no matter if you're a Hollywood star or a teacher or a firefighter or an actor.
I completely agree. And Hollywood stars have been involved in politics forever on both sides. You know, there have been people like John Wayne, very much on the conservative side. And, today we have folks like George Clooney, I think Leo DiCaprio, right, who are on the liberal side. So, yes, this is nothing new.
This is from our friend Alex Kawa. They say, last week was the primary election to replace Mikey Sherrill in Congress. And the very likely winner in this wealthy suburban North Jersey district is a, quote, abolish ICE leftist. Do you think this is a sign that the Dems base, even in areas that have usually not liked these types of candidates, are ready for change?
Absolutely. A new poll came out today that I think had the Democrats something around 8 points in the generic poll. That is, do you favor Democrats or Republicans for Congress this year? Now, these polls are not predictive, but they are indicative of the Democratic base ready to rise up. And as I've said, if you're a candidate, don't presume you got to move left. Don't presume you got to move right. Democrats traditionally have been a very big tent with both those on the left and not on the right, but right center in recent years. And my one big piece of advice for everyone is just be yourself. Don't try to tilt with the political winds.
Good advice, Pops.
You always follow it.
True. What do you think is the reason behind Trump's threat to not allow the opening of the Ontario-Michigan bridge?
This is a bridge, I think, from Detroit into Canada. It's a short bridge, like a mile and a half, but it's very important, for commerce. And Trump is just out to punish Canada. He doesn't think Canada respects him. The prime minister, has openly criticized him, something Trump hates. He wants the Canadians to bend to his will. And this is just more petty revenge, which is the hallmark of this administration. He said it. Retribution is coming. You got to understand with Trump, he's not subtle. He's not the hidden hand president like Dwight Eisenhower. He's right out front.
Thank you to G1 for your 10 gifted memberships. We appreciate that. Do you think it was a mistake to take the dollar off the gold standard?
No, I think the gold standard was stultifying the economy and, letting the dollar respond to market forces is probably, the right thing to do. The problem was, and there's another side to this, when Nixon took us off the gold standard, that meant that you can run uncontrollable deficits. And who would pay for them? Foreigners, who use their dollars to buy Treasury securities. You didn't have to have a gold drain to pay for the deficit. And it also has unleashed currency trading, which is far and away the biggest trading market in the world, far overshadowing even the New York Stock Exchange. So yes, I think, there are two sides to this, but I'm not a gold bug.
You're not a gold bug?
Probably not.
Oh.
You got any gold for me?
No.
What
do you think of James Tallarico's chances to win a Senate seat in Texas in the November midterms?
There's something very interesting. And again, don't take the polls as gospel. But the two upstarts are winning in the polls. Attorney General Paxton, who's burdened with multiple scandals, who was impeached by his own party in the Senate, in the House in Texas, although he was not convicted in the Senate, loaded with baggage, is like 7 points ahead. And Representative Crockett, the African-American woman, is also about 7 or 8 points ahead of Tallarico. So right now he's got a bit of an uphill fight. You know, a lot can change, but early voting in the primary is coming down very soon. It would be quite incredible to have an African-American woman against a scandal-ridden Republican, including scandals apparently involving women.
This is from member Dirtier Dog. They say, Professor, I read your book, Repeal the Second Amendment, last summer and was surprised at how thorough and convincing your arguments and data were. It feels important to know the original framers did not want individuals to have the right to bear arms, and that knowledge changes the way I view the Second Amendment. My suspicion is most people believe that the framers wanted each individual to have a right to bear arms. Why do you think this interpretation has shifted within everyday people?
Yeah, it didn't used to be that way until the late 20th century. You know, for almost 200 years, it was the conventional wisdom that, of course, the Second Amendment was all about a well-regulated militia and not about individuals bearing arms. In fact, to the extent debates survive about the amendment, it was all about whether certain religious groups could exempt themselves from the militia. Nothing to do with the individual right to bear arms. And among many arguments, my killer argument was, who crafted the Second Amendment, Sam? Do you know?
Slave owners.
Slave owner, James Madison. Slave owners voted for it in Congress, in state ratification processes. Would slave owners for 1 second have considered voting for an amendment that would have given free black people the right to keep and bear arms, or women the right? Come on. That's just absurd. Not a single person, not one of the thousands involved in voting for the amendment or ratifying in the states ever said it established an individual right to bear arms. All of this changed with the strategy of the National Rifle Association after the right-wing revolution in Cincinnati and the takeover by President Charlton Heston, in which they perpetrated what the former conservative Chief Justice Burger of the U.S. Supreme Court called one of the biggest hoaxes in American history, the idea that somehow the Second Amendment gave individuals a right to keep and bear arms. And then Antonin Scalia ran with that in the Heller decision in 2010, even though he had no direct contemporary evidence for it, and got roundly criticized by conservatives for abandoning his own idea of being faithful to the strict construction of the Constitution that put this falsehood into American constitutional law. It's I agree with Berger, one of the biggest and worst hoaxes we've ever experienced. And you would think, to listen to the gun lobby, that we were the safest country among our peer democracies, especially when it came to gun violence, because we have these guns to defend us. Well, the opposite is true. As I point out in my book, an American is 20 times more likely to be murdered by a gun per capita than a resident of our closest peer democracies, the G7 group of nations plus Australia. Not 20% more likely, 20 times more likely.
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
Thank you to Marie for your donation.
Thank you.
Next question is from our resident Giants fan, James Lagruta. They say, I think the keys still work despite the 24 outcome. Also, every good model can have an outlier, especially when a sitting president was pushed off his party ticket just days before the convention. Your thoughts?
I agree with you completely. You know, no model is going to be perfect, especially over a 45-year, 43-year time span. It's quite amazing that it's done as well as it has. And, you know, I've been on some podcasts with authorities in the field, and they've all said, it in fact would look suspicious if your model was always right. It's more credible that, you know, your record is 10-1, which is, you know, an amazing record for a model over a 40-year period. Of course, I'm now thinking, you know, how to use the model for the upcoming election. Because remember, I'm not psychic Gene Dixon with a crystal ball. I'm not Speaker Mike Johnson who thinks the Almighty talks to him. The keys are based on history, and a 40-year run is a pretty good run, but over that time, patterns of history can change.
Good point. This is from Marzum. They say, "Hi, Dr. Lichtman. Since Saturday is Valentine's Day, give me something that fills your heart." I'm not sure how they're phrasing this.
With hope for the future. I got it. All of the Democratic victories fill my heart with hope for the future. Finally, the Democrats are waking up, challenging Trump, and getting a spine. The other thing that fills me with hope is so many people voting with their feet against the excesses of ICE and generally of this administration. And you don't see anything remotely approaching the volume, not even close, of any kind of counter pro-Trump, pro-ICE demonstrators. How much time we have?
3 minutes.
All right. 2 more questions.
2 more questions. This is a £5 donation from Charlie. They say, "Can you talk more about misinformation during the 24 election? Is it just social media based?"
It's primarily social media based, but also echoed by the right-wing media, cable media. And let me give you just one example. There are many in my book, but we're on limited time here. Abortion. According to the exit polls, the pro-choice position beat the pro-life position by over 30 points. That should have powered Harris to an easy win if the evaluations of the candidates reflected that. But Elon Musk had devoted a specific effort to muddle the abortion issue and create disinformation. The result was that the gap between Harris and Trump was not 30 points. It was not 15 points. It was not 10 points. It was not 5 points. It was 3 points. If it had been even 10 points, 1/3 of the gap, she would have won easily.
This is a $5 donation from Wyatt Hamilton. They say, "Way too early, but does the scandal key turn for the 28 election?" I guess they're basing that off of all this Epstein stuff.
You know what my answer is, Sam? Too early.
Too early, yeah.
Yeah, there's still so much to come, but it's certainly looking shaky. Let's put it that way. But
all right,
I'm not making definitive statements yet about any keys.
One final question from Secular Monk.
Oh, a good friend.
Trump changes to student loans are set to go into effect later this year. It could raise loan payments by $3,500 annually. Your thoughts?
Yeah, Trump punishing the elite, right? He thinks his base is the less educated, and the Democratic base is college grads. And this is just another part of the Trump retribution tour. And again, who does it hurt? Ordinary Americans who are trying to better themselves with education.
All right, with that, we will wrap up Lichtman Live for this evening. Shout out to $5 donation from CD No Handle. They say, in addition to the Consumer Federal Protection Bureau and EPA rendered useless, I heard today they've shut down over 90% of the Department of Education.
Yes, we've talked about that a lot on this show.
Joanne Roberts, thank you for your donation. They say there are protests here in Australia over Israeli's president's visits. Free Throw Guy, $10 donation, says, if it wasn't for the Lichtman boys, I'd be sitting in front of my TV absolutely inhaling Fox News. Thank you for telling the truth. Andrew Beer with the $10 donation says, who has time to think about Epstein when we have a Bad Bunny performance at the Super Bowl?
Right.
That's a funny one. Thank you to Suzanne, Michelle, Jacqueline for your donations. Dad, what are your final words to the people?
All right. You know, there's so much smoke here in the Epstein files. There's a lot of fire creating that smoke. It's not a hoax. It's very real. And I'll tell you, there is a lot more to come. We have not seen the end of this. As you say, Sam, one of the most horrific stories in the history of the country.
All right, folks, with that, we will sign off for the evening. Thank you all for watching. See you on Thursday, and good night.
Good night.